Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to Andy's Book Club. And this week we're covering Chapter 5, which is The Power of Context, Part 2 of The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. This chapter opens up with talking about the book, which is called Divine Secrets of the Ya-Ya Sisterhood, written by this person named Rebecca Wells. It was not a very well-known book at first. She was an established author, and some of her books, previous books, before this one, was relatively well received. However, this book, at first, it didn't really take off. But it all of a sudden, within a year, became super popular and sold 2.5 million copies in 1998. This is like a case study that we can look at, right? The Ya-Ya Sisterhood became famous because it was picked up by a bunch of book clubs in Northern California. And specifically the ones in San Francisco were the ones that really liked this book. There are some properties to this book, it turned out, that made it really appealing to book clubs because it was relatable. And it talked about, the struggles between, I think, a mother and a daughter. I haven't read this book myself, but I am told within this chapter of The Tipping Point that, it just appealed to a certain demographic. And because it was picked up by the Northern California or San Francisco book clubs, that's kind of what made it really take off. So this relates to the power of context for sure. So if you guys remember what the power of context is, it's basically those little things behind a situation that happens in the background that help explain why one thing took off and one thing didn't take off, right? So it's those little things in the background that determine whether a thing becomes popular or not. And if you really analyze why something became popular, you'll find that there are certain properties or certain very small things that help create success, whether it be a book or whether it be Paul Revere doing his Midnight Ride. Moving on, the next thing that's one of the most important topics covered in this chapter is something called Dunbar's number. I think Dunbar was a anthropologist or sociologist, and he came up with this rule called the Rule of 150. The whole idea is that our brains, as humans, were limited to our capacity in terms of caring for other people and caring for things and social interactions and stuff like that. For example, the average number of people whose death would be devastating to you would be about 12 people. There's 12 people, or more or less, right? This is an average, so it could be more, it could be less, but on average, there's about 12 people in your life right now who, if they were to die, and knock on wood that they don't, but if they were to die, then you'll be devastated, right? And this goes back to the idea that we can only have about 10 to 15 very close friends. So this is something that you can evaluate in your own life right now, right? So look in your own life and look in your messaging app that you use most often. And you'll find that most likely you don't talk to more than 15 people on a regular basis, right? So there's only about 10 to 15 people, or maybe even less, because I heard that these days people have even less close friends, right? So there's probably no more than 15 people at the very maximum that you would consider a close friend. Dunbar's number, 150, this seems to be the maximum number of people that we can have a genuinely good social relationship with. Examples in history were tribes, right? So back when, this is like thousands and thousands of years ago, when humans were still nomadic tribes, typically these tribes do not exceed 150 people. And military commanders have noticed that too. So throughout history, when an army became larger than 150, the effectiveness of that army goes down. So this is why when we have squadrons, even in our modern armies around the world, typically you don't find units that are more than 150 that are working very closely together. They might be part of the same army, but within a platoon or a detachment, there's probably less than 150 people that you would actually go onto the battlefield with. And even back then, when armies like, when large armies fought each other in like a land-based war, think of like ancient Roman times, the Romans had their own way of organizing the army such that you'd have a small squadron of like the smallest unit I think is 10 people, right? So there would be 9 other people that you'd fight very closely with. But after 150, you'll realize that the effectiveness of any group goes down. So this was noticed and put into practice by a company called Gore Associates. So Gore Associates is a very unusual tech startup that's based in Delaware, where everyone has the same job title and there's no distinctions between different members of the company. So they're all associates. So there's no managers or CEOs and stuff like that. And they operate using the 150 people rule. So every time the number of employees exceed 150, the group splits into 2. So this is very effective because, again, due to the rule of 150, right? Think of a company as just a tribe or an army, right? So the organizational part applies to a whole bunch of different organizations, whether it be an army or a company. So a company is almost like an army anyways, right? It's a group of people trying to achieve some specific goals, right? And yeah, basically you find that small groups tend to work best in terms of getting things done. And if the group becomes too big, it becomes less effective. So they did this couples experiment where there were 59 couples and they were in a romantic relationship with each other that exceeded 3 months. So this is people that people that know each other well by that point, and there are people that are close to each other, right? And half of them were split up. So the couple was split up, and then they were asked to recite like a number of facts, a list of facts, and then they split up, and then they find that. Or some of them were split up, and they find that the couples that were split up, they recalled facts less effectively than the couples who got to work together that weren't split up when asked to recall these facts. So the idea is that when you are close to someone, you kind of share this interwoven kind of memory web where one person would be responsible for remembering certain things and another person might be better at remembering other things. And this is unspoken, by the way. So they didn't prearrange, okay, you're going to remember facts 1 to 9 and I'm going to remember facts 10 and beyond. This is just kind of like an unspoken thing where if you're in a relationship with someone, or if you're just really close to someone, it doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship, but even if you're friends with someone, then you tend to notice that collectively you're able to just automatically segregate things and remember things in an interconnected and interwoven way. So this is very interesting, and this is an area of sociology / psychology that this part of the book really explores. And there's much more to this, but this is just what Malcolm Gladwell, the author of the book, has explored so far. So yeah, this is a little bit of a shorter chapter this week, but I think it's very important, the ideas that were presented in this chapter, because I thought this was one of the most interesting chapters, by the way. And this is more of a personal opinion of mine, so feel free to disagree with this if you feel like. However, I think what this chapter is implying, especially with the rule of 150, is that communism works, but only in small groups, right? So whenever we've seen a communist society or a country try to go communist, usually it doesn't work out that well, right? Think of 1940s, 1950s China, or 1940s, 1950s Vietnam, or modern day North Korea, right? It doesn't typically, or the Soviet Union, of course, right? It collapsed. It typically doesn't go that well. However, I think what we found out throughout this chapter was that communism does work to an extent when the group is small, because when you have a tribe, then everyone is more or less happy with working with each other and sharing things because we all know each other. But then when it comes to a country, then it it doesn't work nearly as well. But yeah, that's kind of just a random tangent thought that I had of this chapter. But yeah, let me know what you think of this chapter. And yeah, as I said, I think this is one of the most interesting chapters. So be sure to give it a read and don't just listen to my summaries if you have the time. But yeah, that's it for this chapter right now. And I'll see you guys next week where we discuss chapter 6, which is a case study. All right, so I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.